I'm Dr. Mohammad Rafi, Associate Professor, Department of Cyber Security at Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. Today I want to discuss about the network programming and management subject. The topic is difference between the socket and the raw socket. Here is the differences in between the socket and the raw socket in terms of the definition is socket. Socket is nothing but generally we are using at client side and server side. Here generally client side we are using socket, and server side also we are using a one socket. These are the sockets can generally we are using for sending the data or receiving the data. Sending and receiving the data. For sending and receiving purpose now we are creating the sockets at server side and client side. Both the client side and server side now we can create. At the end point for sending or receiving data across a computer network, so it is a socket standard. The definition for raw socket is, so it is a type of socket that allows the direct sending and receiving of the IP packets. Here, without any protocol, specific transport layer formatting. Without the formatting now, these are the raw sockets now, which is sending the data and receiving the data without the format. So this is about the raw socket definition. And use cases. What are the use cases can be utilized in a socket and in a raw socket? In a socket, generally we are utilizing the standard network and the communication, that is, for example, web browsing, email. So these are all the use cases. So generally for these use cases now we can utilize the high level protocols, that is a transmission control protocol and UDP protocol. These high level other protocols can be utilized for a socket standardizations. And a network the diagnosis. In a raw socket, generally here we are typically use the use cases as a for network diagnosis. Network diagnosis means here any networking problems. Any problems can be diagnosed or identify the problems or rectify the other problems. Protocol development also. The protocol development now with a set of rules and regulations, generally these protocols can be developed based on that rules and regulations. And security the applications where low level network access is required for the security other applications. Here is the protocol layers. The protocol layers, in terms of the protocol layers, the difference between the socket and raw socket is here in terms of the protocol layers now, these other sockets are operate at the transport layer. That means here now we are utilizing the TCP and UDP, transmission control protocol, user datagram protocol. Here is raw sockets. In terms of the raw sockets now, which is protocol layers are operates at the network layer with help of the internet protocols. In terms of flexibility, if we take in terms of flexibility, so the flexibility here which is limited to the capabilities of the transport layer protocol, very limited. And in a raw sockets are which are the highly flexible and which allowing the customer the protocols that can be accessing to all parts of the other packets. So in terms of easy of uses, means here, so this the raw socket standards are very easier to use with built-in functions for common tasks. For common tasks now that can be utilized. Here is in terms of the raw sockets, the easy of use is a very more complex. The usage complexity is very high. Why? Because now particular the format is required for receiving the data or for sending the data with help of this raw socket, one fragmentation, particular the format fragmentation is required, which requiring the manual handling of the protocol headers. Here is the security. In terms of this the security, now generally the socket standards now which is providing the very high security. Here which built in the error checking and the flow controls. Errors, if is there any errors, so that can be check the errors and flow can be controlled. The traffic is arise here in this other traffic now the flow can be controlled. So which are more susceptible to misuse and requires the careful handling to avoid the security issues. That means here now these socket standards are more secure comparing than the raw other sockets. Why? Because in a raw sockets now generally some misuses will be happened. So which requires the careful handling and which avoiding the security issues. So performance in terms of the performance optimized for general purpose networking. So with error handling and read other transmission generally. So in terms of the performance now raw sockets which are the specific, these are the raw sockets are very fast comparing the socket standards. Here why? Because the use cases but the lacks built-in reliability feature. Here is now built-in reliability the features can be considered uh, on a raw socket at a client side and at a receiver side. The permissions in terms of this the permission here, no special permission is required for this one. And for standard the applications, here is now which requires the administrative and root privileges. So in a raw sockets, here is the common functions. The features of the common functions are generally in a socket standards now we are using the socket is a common function. So for creating the sockets now generally by using this other function we can create the socket and bind, listen. So listening here which is ready for accepting, which is ready for receiving the data. The meaning of the listen here which is ready for receiving the data. So once when it is receiving the data with help of the accept function, these are all the common function. If it is accepted now, then only the client can send the data to the server and connect, send, receive. So these are all the common functions that can be utilized in a client and server communications. In raw sockets now what we are doing here, we are using the socket function send to, receive from. That means sending to which device, which client now we are going to sending the data here, and receive from which device now we are going to receiving the other data. Suppose here if it is a one your server from it is a server mission here, from this other server mission now from which other device, from which other client from which client now we are going to receiving the data. The number of other clients, client 2, client 1, client 2, client 3. Here from which other client now we are going to receiving the other data. So that means receiving from. We can specify the receive from function. Receive from function. By receive from function we can receive the data and handling of the packet headers. Now these are the packet headers now that can be handled from the clients. The required client now we can able to handle. By examples are the best examples for the sockets are the web servers are the best example, and email clients. Email clients also it is a best other example, and file other transfers. So in terms of the raw sockets, the best the example is a packet sniffers, custom network other protocols, or the implementations network the monitoring tools. So these are all the best the examples for the raw sockets. And here next input in terms of the differences in terms of the input and output. The difference is in terms of the input is The socket the standards are the higher level data. Now, which is transfers from client to destination. The data is a very higher level data can be transferred. So that means here higher level of the data. For example, now we are utilizing the HTTP request and email messages. HTTP hypertext transfer the protocol and email messages. So these are all the input. That means now with help of the standard the socket, now we can receive the higher level data from the client or number of other clients. Now the server can be received. HTTP request also now, which is handles the higher level of data. Bulk amount of data can able to hand with help of these the protocols. And raw sockets now generally, so which receiving the raw input to packets. Raw input packets can be received. And so this raw input packet, whatever the packet now we are taking, each and every packet, so which is having the header and payload. So with help of these payload and header, now which is receiving the raw packets. So which is receiving the raw packets. Raw packets can be received, and which is including the header and payloads. Headers and payload can be included. Here, data processing. In terms of the data processing here, automatically which handles the protocol specific details. The protocol or the specific details are, so that is a TCP, UDP header and error the checking. These are all the protocol data or the pre-processing. Raw sockets now, the raw sockets user, in a raw sockets, user must manually construct and parse the IP packets. Here is which including the header. Every socket, raw socket, so whatever the packets now which is receiving, so the packet should have the header of that header along with the payload. Now generally we are transmitting the data header along with the payload. The addressing, in terms of this addressing now, the differentiation if you observe, so socket standards now which are uses the socket address structures. For example here, struct socket address in IPv4. So in terms of the raw sockets now, which uses the socket address structures. But here now which requires the more detailed handling of the IP addresses and port. Each and every device, whatever the device now we are considering, so which is having the IP address 192.168.1.0. Along with this now we are using the port number. Port number here now 21506 is a port number. Each and every device which is having IP address and the port number. So this is the differentiation in terms of the addressing. Function calls. Generally here in a socket standards now what we are doing, now we are using the function calls are the, so that is a receive and a receive from and a receive message. So generally these are the functions we are utilizing. Here raw sockets in a raw sockets now we are utilizing the receive from, receive message. That means receive from now which is indicating we are receiving the data from particular expected device only. Here the server generally what it is doing, the server mission, the mission now which is receiving number of other clients, number of other hosts, client 1, client 2, client 3, isn't it? Then from the number of these other devices, now if you use the receive from function, with help of this receive from the function, now client which is specified from which this the server here which is specify from which client now we are going to receiving the data. That is receiving from client 1, receiving from client 1 or client 2 or Client 3. Specific the device, specific device can be specified with help of this receive from function. Send a message also. Now, particular the respected the device, specified device, identified device. Now we can send the message. That is a send a message. Send a message by using the send message. Now we are sending the particular. Next difference is error handling. So here is error handling. That means built-in error detection correction can be done. Errors can, while transmitting the packets from source to destination, so whatever the packets now we are going to transmitting here, these are the packets effectively transmitting or not, any data is losses. Now we can identify the error and rectify the error, retransmits the data. That is a built-in error detection can be done. If is there any error is arised here, while transmitting the data from source to the destination device, that can be corrected. For example, TCP transmissions. TCP transmission or TCP retransmission is the best example for error handling. Raw sockets. Raw socket means here, so no built-in error handling. Now we are not using the no built-in. Here is we are not handling the errors, but in a socket the standards we are handling the errors. That here it is must be managed by the user, but here not managed by the user. Here is managed by the that can be protocol. That is a TCP the protocol. Now we can manage here. And payload means here only the data part of the message. That means the protocol headers are handled internally. And full IP packets means now which is including both the headers and payloads. Headers and payload can be included. Here is the features. Typically now we are taking the data flow. In terms of the data flow, generally how we are going to flowing the data, how we are going to considering the data flow means here. So that is a application of the data. Application of the data means here, if you take the any one device, in this the device here, the number of application can be running. So it is a client. This is the client. Now we are running the number of applications. Application 1, 2, 3. Number of applications can be run. So these are the applications. Based on these application now, how we are transmitting to next the client to, or how we are going to transmitting to the our server here with help of the TCP UDP protocols. Now with help of the TCP and or UDP protocol, now we are going to transmitting the data. Here is we are utilizing the internet protocol. So that is and with help of that one, that can be released into the network. Here is the application data transferred to the customer IP address, packets and networks. So this is the table now which is emphasize the differences. So in how input and outputs are handled between the sockets and raw sockets. So these are all the outcomes. So the outcomes of the sockets and raw sockets are easy for development, control over the data, security and permissions are very easy, and performance and reliability can be achieved. Whereas the raw sockets can offering the high performance for specific tasks but require manual error handling and reliability are the features. Here the references for raw sockets and sockets are now William Stalling book is a better for the sockets and raw sockets. So in which here SNMP V2, SNMP V3 and RMON 1 and 2. So this is a reference book and a web references. So this is a web other references of the raw sockets and standard sockets. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.